We're going to be talking about what's yours is ours, which is the attitude which seems to come over a lot of individuals, groups, and yes, even special interests when it comes to accessing taxpayer money. And you wouldn't be, well, maybe you would be surprised at some of the groups that are lined up at the trough to get their hands on the dollars that you earned and either Uncle Sam or the state taxed away from you. Details are coming up.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, I welcome you to Nowhere to Hide. Twice a week, I have the opportunity to sit down and just go into a little more depth over some of the issues and some of the stories that are being covered by legacy media, or sometimes not being covered by legacy media, that could help you better understand what's happening with the Idaho legislature, with government in general, and more importantly, who is actually standing up for your freedoms, your rights, and of course, fiscal responsibility with the money that you, the taxpayer, have earned. Well, illegal immigration is one of those topics that has been a huge hot button, not just here in Idaho, but also nationally. So we're going to start with a memorial. This is House Joint Memorial number 8 on illegal immigration. Now, this is simply sending a message, and some people say, "Oh, I don't think we should have message bills," but when you have a problem that is clearly a problem, maybe somebody needs to say something. In this case, illegal immigration is a massive problem in the United States. In response to the crisis, Representative Dale Hawkins and Senator Glenita Zuiderveld introduced House Joint Memorial 8, or HJM 8, in House State Affairs. Now, this pulls no punches, rightly holds President Biden and the federal government accountable for the invasion at our southern border. And it calls on the U.S. House of Representatives to impeach Biden for the high crime of willfully failing to enforce existing immigration law and sanctioning an invasion of the United States by millions of military men. I know some would say that's just a conspiracy theory, but if you have been paying attention, it's an unusually large number of military-age men that are not only finding their way across our border, but it appears in some cases are being helped, bused, or flown to various communities around the country. It deserves some answers. This HJM 8 also further states that a priority must be made on enforcing immigration laws, securing our borders, combating illegal drugs and sex trafficking. Only after impeachment of President Biden and passage of H.R. 2 should Congress contemplate an effective process for the safe processing of immigrants in the United States and Idaho. Now, during the committee presentation of HJM 8, would it surprise you to know that opposition from big corporate agriculture lobbyists and Democrats arose as they attempted to weaken the message? However, IDFC members, Representative Heather Scott and Representative Joe Alfieri, stood firm. Scott confronted industry representatives for admitting to hiring illegal workers, emphasizing it's time to end such practices. Alfieri underscored the need to maintain the memorial's strength. HJM passed out of committee. Now it's headed to the House floor for what's sure to be a showdown between upholding the law and confronting big corporate agriculture interests. Now, I know it's a hot button issue. And oftentimes when it comes to illegal immigration, that's, one of those places where people's fears or sometimes their prejudices can be played upon, or it can just be dismissed as, well, the only reason this is happening is because you hate people who speak this language or have skin of this tone or whatever. There's a very real problem with public benefits, in other words, taxpayer money being used to provide benefits for people who may or may not need them, or who are here because somebody built a bird feeder and has made those benefits available. Let's look at a couple of the other areas, though, where people are, Brian Alman put it, I think, very well, gorging at the public trough. Special interests think they have a right to your money. And this is one of the big problems. Now, specifically, Brian is talking about, I believe it was H602, which was a bill to make sure that public monies don't go to, for instance, teachers' unions. This is keeping taxpayer money separate from, these private special interests. He says, my friends at Think Liberty Idaho clipped some of the committee debate on this bill. And he says, you'll notice that all the union representatives arguing against this bill, which, by the way, went way beyond just teachers. It included the Professional Firefighters of Idaho, whose private legislative update leaked last week. As that leaked document showed, Unions exert a lot of influence in our legislature, and last Thursday's vote proved it. Right now, teachers' unions have sole negotiating power in many, if not all, public school districts, and their contracts give them paid time off for both union activities and electioneering. You kind of get the impression maybe that education is taking a back seat to, getting power and funding. So Brian Alman says we must confront a fundamental question. Is the purpose of our government to protect our rights, or is it to extract money and resources from productive Idahoans and to give them to special interests? Old guard Republicans are defenders of the old system, while a new generation of populists are rising up with the crazy idea that a government of the people should serve the people, not public sector unions, not big businesses, not special interests. You ever wonder why these things get so contentious? There's serious money at stake. But you have to wonder, are your legislators behaving as if they are representing the people? In other words, they're very conscious of how much money is being taken from you in the form of taxation and making sure that whatever is taken is being used for the purposes that were intended. In other words, the proper role of government, not to grant favors to this group or that group in hopes of, securing re-election. Because it's getting a lot harder to maintain that illusion of, yeah, we're doing it all for you. Now cough up some more money. Somehow it just doesn't seem like it's operating in our interest. Here's Representative Josh Tanner from District 14, who took a lot of heat for arguing against expanding postpartum Medicaid coverage from 60 days to a full year. Now, was he doing this because he's a cruel Republican who hates people and wants babies to die? Of course not. But that's kind of how he's portrayed. He took a lot of heat for this. This is the stupidest thing ever. Why wouldn't we take federal money? Well, listen to what he says here. We need to find Idaho solutions rather than always looking to the federal government and all the regulations that come with it. Yes, the federal government is more than happy to shower us with money, again, plundered from the taxpayers. But every dollar that comes to the state from the federal government comes with strings attached. In fact, that's true even for money that comes from the state to you. There are always conditions. And so it's wise to, first of all, ask, is this money that they should be taking in the first place or spending in this way? And if the answer is no, and somebody's got to say no, then maybe it's time to put our foot down and see that that's enforced. Here we have Planned Parenthood testifying against H668, prohibiting tax dollars for gender transitions. That's a far cry from we just want to be left alone, or we just want to marry, we just want to be able to live and have the same rights as everybody else to, you need to pay for my child's gender confusion. The testifier makes a category error saying people have a right to health care. And Brian Alman rightly points out, you cannot have a right that depends on the labor of others. So when someone talks about, well, you have a right as a citizen, no, you don't. If it creates an obligation, that's not a right. That's an obligation. And there's a world of difference. And frankly, it's not that people are indifferent to the mental struggles that those with gender dysphoria may be dealing with. But we feel like it's their responsibility primarily, or their family's responsibility primarily, and not the taxpayers to simply, hear a sob story and say, you know what, take whatever you want. Here, take my car keys too. See if that will fix it. So I looked into the Idaho Capital Sun's story on this, and I thought it was interesting the way that they reported this. The headline, Idaho ban on public funds for what they call gender-affirming care, heads to the House floor. House Bill 668 would block Medicaid from covering gender-affirming care, but the legislation's impact is unclear on health insurance for state employees. I guess this just comes down to, again, that idea that it's not enough to just live and let live. The people who are pushing the LGBT agenda, and it's not every person who's gay, it's just the really activist ones. They're not looking for simple acceptance. They don't want to live and let live. They want legally enforceable obligations on the part of the rest of society to affirm their lifestyle. And that means through tax dollars, or perhaps even through, affirmation. We need our flags hanging in classrooms and so forth. We'll talk about that coming up in a few moments as well. Doesn't that seem just a little bit moving beyond what they should be doing? Here's how the Idaho Capital Sun reports. A bill to ban Idaho public funds, that's taxpayer money, from covering gender-affirming medications and surgeries for Idaho adults and children is headed to the Idaho House floor. House Bill 668 would ban public funds from paying for what they call gender-affirming medications and surgeries. This is experimental medical treatment, mutilation, and using chemicals and hormones to permanently alter those patients. The bill references definitions for that care from Idaho's 2023 ban on providing, again, what they euphemistically call gender-affirming medications and surgeries to children. Now, the ban on using public dollars for gender-affirming care, again, we're using their language, but I'm telling you, it's a lie to call it gender-affirming care, would explicitly apply to Idaho Medicaid, which largely covers low-income and disabled people and insures around 300,000 Idahoans. Now, the bill says Idaho Medicaid can't reimburse or cover gender-affirming medications or surgeries banned under an existing Idaho law. That law banned those treatments for any child or any minor in Idaho, but not all gender-affirming care, the Idaho Capital Sun previously reported. But the law's implementation has been temporarily blocked as a lawsuit challenging the legislation makes its way through the courts. State property, facilities, or buildings can't be used to provide the surgical operations or medical interventions in that previous law. Doctors or healthcare professionals employed by state, county, or local governments can't provide those services in the course and scope of public employment. Now, again, this is written in such a way as to make it sound like, well, it's those mean Republicans who are just trying to hurt the people who are hurting the most. Okay, that's the narrative. But are you familiar with the WPATH documents that were released here recently? Because there is a very serious problem in the sense that the people who are writing those standards of care for the medical profession are themselves activists. And this is information that has just come out within the last couple of weeks, where there were whistleblowers who leaked this information and said, this is actually kind of a problem. This is a look at one of their internal documents from the president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH. Marcy L. Bowers, says, as you know, acknowledgement that detransition exists to even a minor extent is considered off limits for many in our community. Why would that be? Because people admit it was a huge mistake and then try to fix it. I do see talk of the phenomenon as distracting from the many challenges we face. I will echo other comments to say all surgeries and all medical treatments have regret rates that are typically much higher than what we see for gender transition. We do not see legislators and media go after breast augmentation, tubal ligation, or facelifts that I ever know of. Medical decision-making needs to remain with doctors, with patients, and with parents, not the courts or legislatures. Now, here's the problem with what has come out from WPATH. Michael Schellenberger's nonprofit Environmental Progress has published leaked documents from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health that shows exactly what gender ideology critics have long warned about. Medical professionals are making up standards of care as they go, and patients don't realize they're being used as guinea pigs. Not just as guinea pigs. If we're going to use that analogy, we might as well call them cash cows as well, because once they become a patient, they are a patient for life. The surgeries, the hormone replacement, it's something that they're going to require some kind of addressing throughout the rest of their lives, because it results in some very permanent changes. And I don't even want to get into the nitty-gritty details. It's not an easy path, but it is a big moneymaker, and it provides some really perverse incentives for those in medicine. So the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, is frequently referenced as the leading authority on transgender medicine, and its standards of care are considered the gold standard. However, even a cursory examination of this ostensibly serious medical organization reveals significant issues. For instance, the latest version of their standards, SOC 8, published in 2022, eliminated recommended minimum age limits for certain interventions, removed the ethics chapter entirely, that's kind of a red flag, and introduced a chapter on individuals who identify as eunuchs, which exposes WPATH's radical agenda. That's a harsh accusation to make, but it seems to be borne out by the fact that there are whistleblowers coming forward and saying, I just can't feel good about what we are doing here. It doesn't feel right. And the sad truth is, in many cases, even with those remarkable interventions, which we euphemistically call gender-affirming care, the people who are on the receiving end of that, those with gender dysphoria, still will find themselves, struggling with suicide, and often do carry it out at a much, much higher rate than their peers who aren't struggling with gender dysphoria. The release of the WPATH Files by Environmental Progress delves deeper, exposing the extreme ideology driving the push to transition children, as revealed through WPATH's internal communications. And these documents highlight a discrepancy between the activist doctors' private agendas and their public statements, suggesting that their outward confidence masks a reality. They are aware that they are conducting a vast, troubling experiment to children and adults. Maybe that's why that chapter on ethics had to go, because it sure doesn't seem like the kind of thing that you would want to be considering ethics when there's dollars to be made, and you're pushing, for removal of age limits and so forth. How young are they willing to go? Do we really want to know the answer? Because it sounds like there are some medical organizations that are taking it to very, very young children, like barely out of toddlerhood, and making permanent changes and permanent procedures available to them. Then we have this, the House Ed Committee kills S-1362 related to the display of flags on public school property. Now, specifically, just so we're clear, we're talking about pride flags in the classroom. Now, how would you feel if somebody wanted to bring a Confederate battle flag and put that in the classroom? That actually is a legitimate part of American history. I think you would see parents, well, now I don't know, that's associated with some very bad things, including slavery, and that's included, it's a thing that we really don't want to introduce our kids to. But hey, here comes the rainbow flag, and well, we shouldn't have a problem with that. I think most parents would agree that really the classroom is not the place to be indoctrinating or otherwise trying to persuade kids to join a particular political agenda. But it's always in the rules, committees, and it's in the little committee machinations that bills like this are lost. This bill passed the Senate 31-4 with just 4 Democrats voting against it. But you had Republicans. Hey, here are some predictable names: Yamamoto, McCann, Clow, Garner, Lanting, Nelson, and Souter vote to hold this bill in committee, and they effectively killed it. Now, again, this is not about, those meanies just trying to keep, people from acknowledging that there's anybody gay out there. Trust me, the media, the entertainment industry, government, all the woke corporations, they're not going to let us forget. It's not like some kid is going to somehow miraculously discover, what? There are gay people out there? I had no idea. Trust me, if they don't know already, by the time June rolls around, they'll at least have an idea. By the time June is over, they'll know for sure. Which brings us to this commentary from the Twin Falls Times-News editorial board about the Republican Party. I thought this was very interesting because they describe it. This might be your tribe, but is it still your party? And this may be some hurt feelings still over some of the things we hear expressed by the old guard, all the former GOP leaders who have been shown the door because, frankly, their big government ways make them indistinguishable from their Democratic counterparts. Check out this language, though. It's one thing to stick with your team through thick and thin. When tribalism takes hold, however, you stick with them not just through thick and thin, but also through right and wrong. Now, that is true. Tribal thinking does lend to flexible ethics. It's not so much even about whether your team is doing well this season, since your team is good and other teams are not good. In fact, when tribalism fully flexes its muscles, says the Times News editorial board, the other side is not just wrong, it's evil. But listen to how they apply this. This only seems to apply, for instance, to Republicans. For example, Lincoln's GOP in many ways embodied big government. You think? It provided moral leadership, if you can call forcing people to stay within the Union, moral, and strong federal intervention to not overcome slavery. I'm sorry, they're buying into doctored history here, to preserve the Union at the expense of states' rights. It brought an explosion of government spending to fund the Civil War and the Transcontinental Railroad. It brought us the first income tax. They say it like it's a good thing. The first national banking system. Again, that's a good thing. And big federal agencies like the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Lincoln also signed the Morrill Act, which funded the land-grant universities. All of these things were progressive, and they fundamentally changed America. Yes, they did. They changed America from a confederated republic where federalism was the rule to a monolithic nation state where the national capital was where all things flowed from, and the states were simply auxiliary offices spread out across the land. But they have even more examples. Republican presidents also presided over the creation of Environmental Protection Agency, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Clean Air Act. Ronald Reagan helped inspire a generation with a noble struggle for freedom and overcoming authoritarianism around the world. Yes, once upon a time, the Republican Party held up inspiring ideals which motivated us to aspire to something greater than ourselves. Please, pour on the platitudes. Better angels of our nature, a shining city on a hill. Okay, but what are they really getting at? Here's what they're trying to say. We want Republican leaders with honorable character and noble virtues, or at the very minimum, decency. We want to be motivated by leaders who are honest, wise, and clear thinking and have integrity and earn respect. We deserve to have leaders in the GOP who can inspire and lift rather than degrade and disgrace. Wait, are they talking about, well, let's just see. But good leaders in today's GOP are being pounded into submission or hounded out altogether. The takeover is almost complete. Oh, here's the payoff line. The Republican Party has become whatever a certain self-centered strongman says it is. So there's that monolithic view that, the only reason the Republicans do what they do is because of Trump. So a little more Trump derangement syndrome creeping its way into the public discourse. Look, Times News editorial staff, I know you guys mean well, but have you ever thought about applying that same reasoning to how the left gets tribal and what happens to people who violate, anything that would offend the sensibilities of the left-wing tribes? Here's a news flash for you. There are many of us on the political right who find ourselves reluctantly supporting Donald Trump, not so much because he is that one person who can tell us the way things should be, but because he represents an alternative to the monolithic uniparty state that you seem to favor. The one with decent people who don't really make waves, but just simply, spread those dollars around to their favorite cronies and grow government at an increasing rate and think it's a good thing. More government isn't necessarily a good thing. And you're seeing a group of populist Republican leadership coming up that is very dedicated to limiting government, making sure that it's accountable for the money that it spends, and making sure that it is focused on protecting our rights instead of enforcing new social obligations on everybody with an agenda. So I guess the tribalism is real. It is, after all, an election year. But just understand, if you were to remove Donald Trump from the equation, it would not change one whit how many people are dedicated to smaller government, more personal freedom, lower taxes, more responsibility, and above all, live and let live mentality. Now, see, that's the kind of tribalism that I'm drawn to. And actually, that's the kind of tribalism that is uniting and bringing people into the GOP and is driving the old, former uniparty members out. Yes, they don't like that phrase. They don't like to be called rhinos, Republicans in name only. But their actions are what speak louder than their words. And if they govern as Democrats, if they vote like Democrats, if they grow government like their Democratic counterparts, why don't they just lean into it and embrace the label and be what they were apparently born to be, big government types? The rest of us would like to have our freedom, our pocketbooks, and our personal autonomy back. And frankly, we're not going to give up. We'll see whose will is stronger. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our